Once again, I, the Comics Kid 2099, have returned for one of my somewhat hiatus series of Barbarian reviews. Today, I will be talking about the 2011 film Conan the Barbarian, starring Jason Momoa and Rachel Nichols, and directed by Marcus Nispel. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of this movie, I first want to quickly cover the plot in case you've still not seen the movie and you maybe are curious if you should go ahead and bother seeing it. The movie opens with narration that sounds like Morgan Freeman talking about how, long ago in an unrecorded age, there was an evil group of sorcerers who made a mask out of bones, and they were very evil and they took over the world. Then the barbarians destroyed the mask, shattering it into several pieces. Each piece was taken by the leader of a different tribe and scattered to the four corners of the earth. If any of this sounds even a little bit like the opening to the first Lord of the Rings movie, that's because it's basically the same thing, but less awesome. We flash forward to young Conan. He wants to be a warrior when he grows up. When he's about 13 or so, a warrior named Kawar Zim and his army destroy Conan's village and take the final piece of the bone crown. We then flash forward to adult Conan, who frees a town from slavery with his friend. They party around for a little bit, then Conan sees a dude who was there at his village when he was a kid. He goes about trying to find the man who killed his father when he runs across a monk lady who is being chased by the same evil soldiers who work for the man that Conan is looking for. Hilarity ensues until the evil king eventually gets the lady. Turns out he needs the pure blood of a descendant of one of the necromancers who put the crown together in the first place. He takes some of her blood, and doing this will transform her into his long-dead wife. Conan stops him, and then he rides off into the sunset. If you recall, one of my opening salvos against the 1982 Conan film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger was that it took too long to get to the actual story. That, and there was precious little story to sustain a 2-hour-plus film, so it had lots and lots of fluff to make up for that. Well, going into this movie, I quickly found that we had a very similar problem. When I get a movie about Conan the Barbarian, then I want it to be about Conan, am I right? I don't want to wait almost half an hour before actually seeing the main character. In a lot of ways, this movie is quite similar to the first Richard Donner Superman movie. You open with scenes of Jor-El talking to the Science Council, the planet blowing up in all of its magnificent glory, Martha and Jonathan Kent finding baby Kal-El, teenage Clark talking to his parents and hating life in Smallville, teenage Clark meeting the ghost of Jor-El, and all of that isn't necessarily bad, but it's not what you want to see when you're going to see a movie about Superman. The same thing is applicable here. I would much rather just open the movie with adult Conan doing savagery without wasting 25 minutes of screen time showing him as a boy training to be a warrior, listening to cliched platitudes from his father, and watching helplessly as his village is massacred. None of this stuff in the first 25 minutes is especially bad or anything, but it's not really Conan. Or if it is, since I do not profess to be an expert on the source material, it's definitely not the Conan that I want to see a movie about. So the movie opens a little too slowly for my taste, to the point where by the time we get to adult Conan, I just about don't care anymore because the movie has wasted so much time getting me there. And this isn't where the pacing problems end, unfortunately. Just shortly before the beginning of the third act, I kept looking at how much time was left, exhaling loudly, and waiting for the movie to finally be over. I imagine my less than enthusiastic reaction to the movie has to do with a couple of things. One, it's the pacing issues, both at the beginning and the end. And two, this movie is kind of the same as the first one, isn't it? You have an evil warlord who kills Conan's father, and then Conan spends his entire life hunting down the evil king, and he ends the movie killing the dude and taking back his father's sword. When I say it like that, it's hard to tell which Conan movie I'm talking about, right? Just a couple of days ago, I made a case that every story doesn't have to be extremely original to be good, and I still maintain that. But how many Conan stories are there? A quick glance at the Wikipedia tells me that Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan, wrote something like 22 complete Conan stories. There were several other stories that were incomplete and were later finished by other authors, and there have been hundreds of stories that Howard had nothing to do with at all, both in prose form and in comic books as well. And if you really don't think that you can look to Conan in the source material, then don't forget Cole the Conqueror, also created by Robert E. Howard. The long story short, which I've mentioned a few times in some of my Barbarian reviews, is that Cole is more or less the same character as Conan. So if you can't think of a good Conan story, look there if you must. What I'm getting at is, while I don't mind if a movie like this fails to be completely original in concept or execution, in this case, it's pretty hard for me to be lenient when there are so many stories about Conan the Barbarian that this movie could have brought to life. And while I once again reiterate that I am no expert on the Conan source material, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that not many of those stories I mentioned are about Conan's quest to avenge his father. Now, outside of the movie having the exact same skeleton as the first Conan film, just with different muscles and skin, etc., this movie rests entirely on a plot device that drives the entire movie, and it feels extremely silly in how it is presented. Remember the bone crown I mentioned, and how I said it was divided and scattered across the planet? Once again, I remind you just how very much the beginning of this movie reminded me of The Lord of the Rings. But where The Lord of the Rings had powerful rings that were unbreakable, thus heralding in the entire journey of the trilogy, this bone crown in Conan is breakable because, well, we see it break. So my question is, if Joe Schmo has 1/7 of the crown in his possession, why not smash it into even smaller pieces? Why not grind it into dust and pour it all in the ocean? Yeah, I know that the story needs the king to be able to put the crown back together so that we can have an evil plot for Conan to foil. But if you absolutely must go with this weird bone crown story, then why not position the story to fit into this idea? Like, say that the crown is unbreakable, and it had to be hidden in some small backwoods village. Then we can see that Conan's father is the one hiding it. But that's really contrived, that out of all of the barbarians in the world, Conan's father would be the one hiding it. So maybe, here's a good idea, there is no bone crown. The whole purpose of this plot device is to turn the bad guy into a god. He says as much at the beginning of the film and at the end of the film. But since that doesn't ever turn into anything at all, what if we just cut out the bone crown thing entirely? If the movie took this idea and ran with it, you could say that Kawar Zim kills Conan's father, maybe he and his wife were on a campaign to take over the world, and maybe Conan's village stood in the way of their conquest, and Conan's father and his entire village died at their hands. But Kawar Zim's wife dies in this bloody battle. Then we flash forward, Conan is an adult, searching for the dude who killed his village, and now Kawar Zim wishes to revive his dead wife in much the same way that he wanted to do in the movie, using Tamara the monk lady. This would work. You wouldn't have to have a stupid plot device that doesn't even do what it's supposed to do, and the movie would still resemble the movie we got. Conan would still want to save Tamara from Zim's goons so that he could more easily get at Zim. And this way, it's easier to buy that it took Zim so long to find a way to revive his wife. I can buy that he tried several different methods and none of them worked, and so now he's planning to use Tamara and revive his wife through her. But in the movie we got, we see that he has all of the crown pieces and the crown is now complete. Then something like 15 years later, he's still not a god, and he's only now looking for the blood of a descendant from one of the necromancers of Acheron. What was he doing in that 15-year period of time? It's harder for me to buy that it took him 15 years just to find someone descended from one of those necromancers. Now, it certainly sounds like I did not like this movie, and that's kinda true. It wasn't the best thing, and I think there are many ways this movie could have easily been improved. But I don't want you to come away from this review thinking that I hated this movie, or that it was the worst thing in the world. It wasn't. There are some really cool things in here that we get. Usually when I immerse myself in any kind of story, I'm all about the advancement of the story, characters, their motivation, how their arcs proceed as they participate in the story, etc. But when I try to think about everything I liked in this movie, none of those things actually come to mind. Instead, I'm thinking of all the good choreography, the cool-looking monsters and demons that our heroes have to fight, and things along those lines. It's kind of a pity because while I think that those things can always make a movie more enjoyable, they never make a movie for me. It's about like if a cake tastes like cardboard, but it has really good frosting on it. And really, what better way to end this review than with that remark? I didn't hate this movie, but I also don't think I'll be watching it again. It's one of those movies that's not awful, but it doesn't really need a sequel. I would maybe, best case scenario, have it on in the background while I'm doing something else and I need something to keep my mind busy. So I hope that this review found you well. If it did, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with some other kind of video. Until then, have a good day.